The airport terminal thrummed with energy on a crisp Tuesday morning. Travelers darting past with rolling suitcases, overhead announcements crackling through the din, and the faint aroma of roasted coffee mingling with the cool bite of conditioned air. Daniel Harper, a seasoned entrepreneur, adjusted the strap of his weathered canvas backpack, his sharp eyes sweeping the chaotic scene as he approached the check-in counter. Dressed in a faded navy sweatshirt and jeans, he melted into the crowd, an unremarkable figure among the sea of passengers. That was precisely his intention. The check-in agent, a young woman with a tight ponytail and a name tag reading Megan, barely flicked her eyes up as she took his ticket. "Economy," she stated, her voice flat as she tapped at her screen with mechanical disinterest. Daniel gave a small nod, stifling a wry smile. If only she knew. He moved through security, noting the subtle disparities in treatment around him. A man in a sleek suit ahead of him earned a cheerful, safe travels from a TSA agent, while Daniel received a curt glance and a wave through. Years in the game had taught him to expect it, though the sting never quite dulled. Boarding the plane was more of the same. The flight attendant at the gate, a woman with a polished smile and a badge identifying her as Emily, scanned his ticket. Her expression faltered when she read his name. "Are you sure this is your seat, sir?" she asked, her gaze darting toward the first-class cabin just ahead. Daniel kept his tone even. "Pretty sure," he replied, brushing past her without pause. He settled into his economy seat, row 16B, and caught the faint murmur of voices behind him. Two flight attendants, Emily and another, a tall brunette named Jessica, according to her tag, huddled near the galley. "Did you see the guy in 16B?" Emily whispered, not quite soft enough. "Looks out of place, doesn't he?" Jessica smirked. "Probably thinks he's slick, trying to sneak an upgrade." Daniel's fingers tightened around his phone, pretending to scroll through emails as irritation simmered beneath his calm exterior. He'd been here before, too many times, but today it hit differently. The casual assumptions, the sidelong glances, they were old wounds reopened. Emily approached a moment later, her smile tight and forced. "Sir, could I see your ticket again? Just to double-check." Daniel handed it over silently, watching her eyes flicker from the boarding pass to his face. Suspicion etched into her features. She hummed, lips pursing. "I'll need to check something with the desk. Be right back." As she turned away, a passenger across the aisle, a woman in her 40s with a navy blazer, muttered, "Why are they hassling him like that?" She shot Daniel a sympathetic look. He nodded slightly, appreciating the quiet solidarity. Minutes later, Emily returned with Jessica in tow. "Sir," Emily began, her tone strained with false patience, "your ID looks a bit off from our system. Has it been updated recently?" Daniel exhaled slowly, keeping his voice steady. "It's my ID, and I fly this airline all the time. There's no mistake." Jessica shifted, glancing at the nearby passengers who were now watching with interest. Daniel leaned back, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe you should check again. I've got time." Emily's jaw tightened, but she spun away without a word. Daniel felt the weight of curious stares around him, some puzzled, others uneasy. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. This was just the opening act. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the engine's steady drone filling the cabin. Daniel sat still, his patience wearing thin as the minutes ticked by. He could hear Emily and Jessica whispering a few rows back, their voices low but sharp with doubt. He'd anticipated pushback, but their relentless skepticism was starting to grate. Emily returned, arms crossed, her expression taut. "Sir, our system still isn't recognizing your details correctly. Would you mind stepping to the front for a moment?" Daniel met her gaze, unflinching. "I do mind," he said calmly. "I paid for this seat, and I'm staying here unless you've got a real reason for me to move." Emily faltered, caught off guard by his resistance. "It's just protocol," she mumbled, her eyes darting around as passengers perked up, watching the exchange. The man across the aisle, the same one in the suit from security, leaned forward. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but firm. "This guy's shown his ticket and ID multiple times." What's the problem? Emily's cheeks flushed. No problem, sir. Just a routine check, she replied hastily before turning back to Daniel. Sir, I'll have to escalate this if you refuse. Daniel took a slow breath, his cool intact. Do what you need to. I'll be right here. A few minutes later, Jessica returned with the lead flight attendant, a wiry man with graying hair and a no-nonsense air. Mr. Harper, he said, glancing at his tablet, there seems to be some confusion with your booking. We need to verify. Let me stop you there. Daniel cut in, his voice low but commanding, drawing every eye in the cabin. I've shown my ID, my ticket, and I've been nothing but cooperative. The issue isn't my seat. It's your assumptions. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Emily shifted uncomfortably, while Jessica stared at the floor, clearly regretting her part in this. A passenger a few rows up discreetly pulled out their phone, recording the moment. The lead attendant sighed, nodding. You're right, Mr. Harper. Our apologies for the inconvenience. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but a sharp glance from her superior silenced her. Daniel exhaled and turned to the window, the tension in the cabin shifting. Whispers rippled through the rows, and he could feel the crew's uneasy glances. His phone buzzed, notifications piling up. A quick peek at social media revealed a clip of the exchange already circulating, comments flooding in. This happens way too often. Handled it like a boss. Respect. As the plane descended, Daniel gazed out at the city, lights blooming below. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about the quiet battles fought daily, often without witnesses or resolution. Today, though, the truth had broken through, swift and undeniable. It wasn't the end, but it was a start. Before the flight, Daniel's motivation. Daniel Harper wasn't just any businessman. At 42, he'd built a tech empire from scratch. A self-made millionaire who'd clawed his way up from a modest upbringing. But success hadn't erased the memories of being underestimated, judged by his appearance rather than his merits. Lately, he'd grown restless, tired of boardrooms and polished facades. He'd started flying economy on purpose, testing how people treated him when the trappings of wealth were stripped away. This flight was his latest experiment, a chance to see if the world had changed, or if he'd just been shielded by his status too long. That morning, he'd lingered over coffee at home, scrolling through airline reviews. Complaints about rude staff and inconsistent service caught his eye. He booked the ticket under his legal name. No titles, no hints of his CEO role, slipped into his old college sweatshirt, and headed to the airport, a mix of curiosity and resolve driving him. The cabin dynamics, a closer look. On the plane, the tension wasn't just between Daniel and the crew. Emily wasn't malicious. She was exhausted, 3 months into a job that paid too little for the stress it brought. Jessica, her friend since training, followed her lead, their banter a shield against the monotony. The lead attendant, Tom Grayson, had seen it all in his 20 years aloft, but he'd grown jaded, more focused on protocol than people. Daniel noticed the passengers, too. The woman across the aisle, Karen, was a marketing exec heading to a conference. Her empathy born from her own run-ins with bias. A teenage boy, too, rose up, filmed the standoff, lived tweeting it with hashtags like #AirlineFail. The cabin became a microcosm, some rooting for Daniel, others annoyed by the delay, all watching a drama unfold at 30,000 feet. The turning point, truth unveiled. When Tom apologized, it wasn't just a concession, it was a crack in the crew's armor. Daniel didn't gloat. He nodded and let it go, knowing the real win wasn't a shift he'd forced. As the plane landed, he overheard Emily and Jessica in the galley, their tones chastened. "We should have just let it be," Jessica murmured. "Yeah, but he didn't look like," Emily trailed off, the words hanging unspoken. Daniel deplaned quietly, but the story didn't end there. The video hit 1 million views by nightfall, sparking debates online. The airline issued a vague apology, promising staff retraining. Daniel didn't care about the PR. He cared about the next person who'd board without a suit and tie, hoping they'd face less scrutiny. Aftermath, ripple effects. Over the next weeks, Daniel wrestled with what he'd stirred up. He met Karen for coffee after she tracked him down via LinkedIn, swapping stories of being misjudged. He considered contacting the airline, not to sue, but to push for real change, maybe a training program he'd fund anonymously. At home, he watched the clip again, seeing not just his defiance, but the passengers' reactions, proof that small stands could echo.